Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I am Frank Cascante. I am the Global Head of Sales for our pharmaceutical and healthcare vertical here at JAS Forwarding. I have the privilege of being your host today for the next hour and a half. I'm accompanied by my colleague, Dina Bunn, who also will chair the portion of the panelists toward the end. We're joined by esteemed industry experts, executives from the manufacturing pharma side, as well as from the airline and our own executives within the air freight product. It's truly a privilege to be able to participate in these, particularly because the topic of today, as you can see, which is how can we be better connected with each other for assurance of supply. Supply chain news, supply chain challenges, disruptions, supply chain has now reached even the heights of government very recently in the US. As most of you have seen, supply chain task forces placed together by the current administration. It's everywhere. An anecdote that made me chuckle a bit was when I was at the optometrist last week, and Dr. Lee had said to me, what type of industry are you in? And I said, I'm in supply chain logistics, which also has a component of freight forwarding. And this highly educated person said, oh my God, that's an incredible industry that you're in. It's so important to so many facets of our life. And I said to myself, where I chuckled, is like, we who are in this craft, in this profession, know that it's always has been incredibly important. It's incredibly important to GDPs of nations, to creation of jobs, to movement of goods. There isn't anything that you can't see or touch necessarily that doesn't have some supply chain aspect to it. And with that, I think it's absolutely critical that we as a group of logisticians, of supply chain professionals, take this moment to become a catalyst for change, to create more resiliency, to create better and more flexible supply chains, to also collaborate a great deal more. And as we said in the opening introduction to it, the hint, it isn't only the digital connectivity. It's also we as a community coming together, breaking barriers, and truly collaborating. Case in point, this is a recent graph here from the US Census Bureau, demonstrating a period within the pandemic of how many of our industries have been impacted because of supply chain disruptions. And as you can see, some of it, I think we could probably say, okay, well, we're very aware of this as professionals in the logistics and the supply chain field. But if you look at it's every facet of our life, from manufacturing, construction to retail, even our healthcare products, who have been prioritized to a great extent, driven by the COVID-19 vaccines and all the ancillary medical products that go along with it for patient care, it too, though prioritized, has seen significant disruptions across the supply chain. When we speak to a lot of the industry, say the pharmaceutical companies, the healthcare companies, even to our own colleagues, airlines, partner ocean carriers, trucking organizations, the one constant that we always see is collaboration, that there isn't enough of it. There has to be significantly more. This is a slide from our first webinar last month, and we kept it because we wanted to establish the base. In that case, we began with what the atmosphere was for pre-COVID, where we are now, congestion, capacity, costs, etc., where we need to break down the barriers to make sure that going forward is the connectivity, the collaboration, and the compliance. Today, our focus, and the focus from our expert panel, is to be able to provide our audience with contributions, with methodologies, with know-how, a way forward to be able to affect that change within your own organizations. And now with that, I also have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker. Welcome, Carol Kijak. She's a Chief Commercial Officer 4 JAS worldwide with the responsibility of 8 functional areas of company, including verticals, account management, and customer solutions. She is a very high performing and solutions focused executive who has built a commercial strategy committed to delivering value to customers. An industry veteran with more than 25 years of experience, Carol has led numerous strategic initiatives that have increased revenue, reduced costs, and improved overall performance for both her clients and employers. She's held various senior level positions in the industry with increasing responsibility, building market presence, and driving revenue growth throughout domestic and international markets. The programs she's managed throughout her career have consistently produced double-digit growth. She's an effective leader, adept at fostering top performance through identifying individual and team capabilities and optimizing their strengths through continuous coaching, training, and customized development plans. And this is the part that I love most. Carol's passion for adventure, community service, and travel frequently intersect. She has taught English to novice monks in Laos, bungee jumped off Soweto Towers in South Africa, worked in a refugee camp in Greece, and swam with the sharks in Australia. While she eagerly awaits the next personal adventure, she looks forward to tackling the challenges her colleagues and clients throw her way. So with that, Carol, welcome. Truly a privilege. I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Frank. So I have to address the story that you told about Dr. Lee first. I didn't know you were going to tell that. It's making me laugh because it's probably close to over 30 years that I've been in this business. And it was finally because of COVID that my family actually understands what I do for a living. So supply chain and logistics has kind of been this vague enigma for them, and trying to explain to family members when I see them, what I do for a living is no longer needed. But I thank you very much for that introduction. I think the biggest adventure we're all on right now is this COVID and the residual impact it's had. But I'm very excited and honored to be part of this meeting today, and I thank you all for joining us. I think we all agree this last year and a half has certainly created a level of chaos in the market that none of us have ever experienced. We see supply chain costs skyrocketing while raw material availability and capacity are plummeting. All of us are doing more with less. And the worst part, if we can even say there is one worse part than the other, is that we really don't have any idea what to expect in the coming years. But I'm hoping that the information that we're going to be sharing today might help reevaluate the way we approach and manage our supply chains to mitigate some of the challenges and constraints we've been experiencing. I think Frank hit the nail on the head about collaboration. The collaboration, I think sometimes we mistake good communication for collaboration. And today, I think we want to highlight what collaboration can look like. Glenn Saldana, who's the chairman and managing director of Glenmark, said it best recently in their annual report. The tenets of doing business in a post-COVID world are resilience, adaptability, and flexibility. And with that sentiment, our goal today is to provide everyone with concepts that provoke ideas and make you think about how you connect and engage both internally and with your business partners to achieve more resilient supply chains. So I wanted to use the SCORE model, or kind of a version of it, as a focal point for this session, because it's something that we can all relate to. It's a kind of an effective way of highlighting what each of our roles are in the supply chain. But I also want to use this to underscore the traditional ways we've engaged with each other in the supply chain. So at the top, you see planning or plan referenced at an enterprise level. This can include the strategy for the company, such as determining the business model. It can be CapEx decisions, such as how much to invest in facilities and research and development. And it certainly includes planning for growth. This type of planning is usually done exclusively as an internal initiative across the executive team barring the occasional use of outside consultants. But there's also planning that's done within other areas of the supply chain. And that planning needs to align with and support those strategic objectives the company sets. And the tactical plan, or the execution function, as it's noted within this model, is how they'll get there. So if I take the sourcing area, I might be planning demand and supply for different types of inventory, whether that be APIs for pharmaceuticals, components for medical devices, along with determining if I'm going to have a limited or distributed supply base. Once that's determined, the execution function can include a supplier validation process or negotiating supplier contracts. Like planning at an enterprise level, this is typically an internal function, and it's done by departments such as sourcing, procurement, and compliance. Now, the same thing occurs in make. Strategic planning can include whether I'm going to outsource manufacturing, while the execution piece can include, will be around the tactical order management and fulfillment process. So materials management, planning and scheduling, operations, and quality are just some of the internal stakeholders that could be involved in this area. In the deliver stage, determining my sales channels is part of my strategic plan. And David, if you could, thank you. My products and inventory have to be delivered through those channels. So seamless execution in transportation and warehouse management is key, along with ensuring that I do it in a fully compliant manner. Logistics, warehousing and distribution, compliance, and inventory management are just a few of the departments that can be involved in this area. And of course, sales, because we can never forget sales or leave them out. If I bring it back to the original SCORE model in its entirety, I want to emphasize a couple of points. The first is the number of stakeholders that are in this process and throughout the entire supply chain. As I mentioned, in source, you have procurement, sourcing, and compliance. In make, you have materials management, operations, planning and scheduling, and quality. And in deliver, it might be logistics, warehouse management, warehouse and distribution, compliance, inventory management, and sales. There are multiple departments, multiple stakeholders, multiple connection points, and multiple handoffs. But we also have multiple business partners throughout the entire supply chain. So this adds to the number of connection points, handoffs, and complexity. If you just stop and think for a moment about how we manage all of those connection points and handoffs, really, I think most days we are just focusing on what's in front of us and making that next handoff or connection point. But we have to think more holistically. As I mentioned earlier, I want to use the model to underscore the traditional ways we've engaged with each other within the supply chain, where we get, excuse me for a moment, please, where we get those handoffs and connection points and how we manage them. So if we look to the deliver stage, I might be working on with our business partners like United and Qatar to get clients' goods from an airport of origin to an airport of destination. And then of course we have other partners that are involved in the pickup and deliveries. And sometimes we partner with warehousing companies where the goods can be inventoried and or delivered. And then you all as the client provide us with business requirements that get put into an SOP, which we subsequently execute to and get measured against. The execution can be done to and from a number of points in the supply chain. And while all of this is going on, you in a land far, far away are working with your suppliers on forecasting and placing orders, which again can involve multiple departments and stakeholders. Those suppliers are then working with their suppliers to do the exact same thing with the objective of completing your orders on time and full. So again, think about everything that transpires between those two activities, all the handoffs that are made internally and externally, and more importantly, how they're made. Now, if you also think about your business partners, ask yourself the question, how much do they know about what happens in other areas of the supply chain? If I'm just focused in the deliver area of your supply chain, and I'm executing consistently to your requirements and expectations, would I be considered successful in your eyes? Would I be considered the coveted trusted advisor? It might be surprising for a lot of you to learn that I think the answer is a hard no. I want to take a moment and a break from the slides for a few minutes to give you a break from that. You still have to listen to me, but you at least get a break from the slides to share a customer story with you. I've been spending quite a bit of time with a few of our customers, really trying to understand what impact this has had on their supply chains, the market constraints, and a number of other things. So with one particular client, we were actually talking about partnering on some strategic initiatives. And there were a number of different focus assessments we suggested. And what they wanted to do was a center of gravity study. They were trying to figure out a location for their global distribution center, what would be the optimal location, as well as a good place for a cross-dock operations in the US. So what they wanted to do was give us a year of their data that was across all modes, across all carriers, and said, have at it. Now, what we wanted to do was make sure that we understood the full picture beyond just the data. So we had scheduled meetings with sales operations, global fulfillment, supply chain, sales and business development, global supplier management, logistics, warehousing and distribution, which included one of their regional distribution centers, and operations. And through these interviews and meetings that we had, along with the assessment of their data, there were quite a few issues that we uncovered that we hadn't had visibility to. So as an example, when we just looked at the data, we could see a number of shipments that were categorized incorrectly. So it was something as simple as, I've got a 200-kilo shipment, or several of them, that are being categorized as small parcel. Now, for us, doesn't make a difference. We move what we move for them. But when they go to renegotiate their contracts, the data will be skewed in terms of volumes that the carrier is quoting on. Minor thing, that is something we can highlight. What we also noted was that there were several shipments that were leaving the same origin, the same RDC, on the same day, going to the same destination, sometimes even on different carriers. So we wanted to start digging into what's causing that. How are you able to, or if you're able to, consolidate those shipments? What's happening from a system standpoint that these are being allowed to go as single shipments? What was happening is that if you look at their US customer base, they are shipping FOB or FCA or Ex Works terms. So all the shipments that the customers are now receiving, the multiple shipments, are increasing their freight costs, their accessorials, their customs clearance costs. And in EMEA, where the terms are DDU or DDP, our customer is actually increasing their freight costs. And part of the reason this was happening was that while this is a high-tech company that ships systems, prior to COVID, 70% of their shipments, or 70% of their orders were, their customers, were requiring them to ship in full. But because of the lack of inventory, raw material shortages, et cetera, they were allowing partials. So this was increasing costs for everyone along the supply chain. More importantly, it was the customers in the US were trying to push these costs back to our customer. In addition to that, because they ship systems, many of their goods would arrive as kits. And since they were just shipping as items were available, our customer or their customer would be receiving individual shipments that they didn't know how to put together as kits. So our customer was having to dedicate time and resources to helping their customers try to figure it out. And ultimately, what's been happening is that their customer has to just ship everything back to them so they can kit it as one kit and send it back out. So obviously, the cost impact, the impact to customer satisfaction, and all of that was significant to the customer. It went even further where they now, because they receive individual shipments, the customers are having a hard time reconciling all those invoices to the original PO they placed. So our customer is actually giving them help on the accounting side to reconcile all of that. So that also impacts their DSOs. So there were a number of other issues that we can talk about that we found with this customer, but I think the important part was really what we as the service provider in our last QBR, we scored very high on our performance. So on paper, we were meeting all their expectations, we were achieving their KPIs, and performance was good, was excellent, in fact. But it wasn't giving the customer what they needed. It hasn't helped them improve the service they deliver to their customer. So process and systemic issues didn't just appear as a result of COVID, but they kind of surfaced. I think we all really saw where we had these issues within our supply chain. It just, COVID brought it forward to the surface. And what we learned about this, or what we've seen, is that we need to sometimes look at our customers like we know nothing about them. We took their data, we looked at all of their data for the center of gravity study, but we can't look at that in isolation. Because if I looked at that in isolation and I didn't have all the interviews with all these other departments and stakeholders, wouldn't have been able to make that assessment. So, we have the responsibility to make a difference, not just to survive this period of uncertainty, but to separate ourselves and find ways to help our customers. And just so you know, those aren't my words. I paraphrased a quote from the CEO of Elanco because it truly inspired me to think about how we're finding ways to help our customers. So while we're still in the process of mapping our present customers process, the interviews are not quite done. We've only scratched the surface on some of the things that have come up, and we want to make sure we have the full picture. I wanted to at least give you a visual of how we've done that for another customer. And this is actually only a draft as well. It's a brand new customer, one that we don't work with. But I think it gives a good picture of looking at a specific area of one supply chain, one part of a customer supply chain. But off to the left, you see all the stakeholders involved in the process, the customer, the supplier, the logistics service provider, the carrier, et cetera. And then in the top right, you see these little icons. So the green can signify manual processes. The red $ it will signify excessive costs, lack of visibility. And then we also have two that we utilize, one for KPIs, one for EDI or API integrations, to highlight areas of the supply chain where we're recommending a KPI be put in place or integration being put in place. But visually, what we wanted to be able to show is, like, where are the issues occurring? So if you look at the first area where raw materials secured, this customer wanted to be able to get visibility to their suppliers' raw materials orders and see that it was received. So they wanted to, we needed to be able to connect the client to their supplier and their supplier's supplier because they didn't have the systems in place to do that. The next area we looked at was that they wanted to be able to see first manufactured sample completed, quality check completed, first run of orders started, and when the production was completed. So we needed to be able to connect the client to their supplier. And then the big area where multiple stakeholders are involved, the ability to connect the client, the supplier, and the carriers, all so that the systems could be received into their fulfillment center. So David, if you go on to the next, I want to give you a visual of what the numbers were. So internal departments that are just involved in the top part of the swim lane with the customer, there are eight different departments that have direct involvement in the activities of this particular process. And there are multiple that are indirectly involved. This customer has 6 suppliers and contract manufacturers. They have one logistics service provider in the US, multiple outside of the US, but this is primarily focused in the US. And they have multiple international carriers, 2 domestic carriers, and the number of annual domestic shipments is 60,000 with a value of well over $1 billion. So the ability to connect all these points and these people is extremely important. And in our solution to them was really to show how we can provide those connection points, but it led also to a number of questions that we asked ourselves. How do we better collaborate across our clients' business partners? You saw the numbers, you saw the stakeholders that are involved. So we know that when we hand off something to United or Qatar or any of other carrier partners, that they have general requirements, just like you do, that they have to meet. But how are we really collaborating to deliver the service that you're expecting to not just to you, but to your customers? And once we connect with clients, how do we leverage their data for better forecasting, planning, and supply chain optimization? We have all the data, now we have to do something with it. What solutions are we proposing and what value will they deliver? And then how do we measure that value? Those are all questions we need to be able to ask. And looking at this process, again, this is one process in one part of the supply chain is limited because there's a lot more that's going on externally that's impacting your supply chain. If I look at pharma and healthcare, you've got a number of things that you're juggling besides the constraints that are caused internally within your supply chain. You've got intense regulatory scrutiny. There is a call for faster cycles for product launches, not just from the market, but many of you have that as part of your strategic initiatives. There's an increased pressure to reduce costs. This past year and a half has taught us that budgets, while they were never, you could never quite stay on track. They've just completely been blown out of the water. You have security threats. There's various levels of security threats, whether that's damage, whether that's pilferage, a number of things. But now there's also the pressure for many of us, not just within the US, but for nearshoring and reshoring. Reshoring, particularly here in the US, there's a pressure for that. And then there's the surge capacity. How are we going to increase manufacturing and production? Again, something that is common that I've seen throughout companies in your industry. Within the US, this is very US centric, but I'm sure it's happening in other markets. The strategic national stockpile. We saw that we didn't have enough inventory for this pandemic. And then finally, of course, market conditions. This can be anything like we've experienced over the past year, but it could also be things like presidential elections in different countries that may impact trade agreements, or a number of other things related to duties, taxes, and change your costs, change your supply chain at a moment's notice. So if we go back to the SCORE model, which is in the center, there are a lot of things happening around it. You've got risk moving through your supply chain, you've got costs moving through your supply chain, and you've got information moving through your supply chain. And somehow we have to manage performance of all of those things happening. So whether it's, again, part of your supply chain internally, like we showed you through that process map, or whether it's the constraints that are externally happening, we need to be able to answer some questions. If I look at risk as an example, we want to be able to look at our customer supply chain and say, what areas of risk, what areas of the supply chain show increased risk, and what's driving this? What impact does it have to your business? What impact does it have to your customer's business? What are some of the risk mitigation strategies that could be deployed? If I look at cost, then the questions I want to be able to answer is, okay, where in the supply chain are there increased costs? What's driving these increased costs? And what cost reduction strategies could be deployed? On the information side, we want to be able to ask the question or answer the question, where does the client, where do you and your customers need visibility in the supply chain? What data do you need? How is this data used? Why do you need it? What impact does it have when you don't get the visibility and the data that you need? And then finally, we need to be able to measure a whole slew of things and be able to answer the question like, how are business partners such as CMOs, suppliers, service providers, your customers a business partner, how are they measured and managed? How are internal departments measured and managed? One of the big things that we see when we do these focused assessments is that if we don't talk to multiple stakeholders and we're not collaborating with them, is that we don't know what the competing priorities are. If I reduce your freight costs by presenting you with a deferred service, that maybe adds a day or two to transit on products that can sustain that, and it reduce your costs, does that mess with the inventory priorities, right? So we need to understand those things. How are exceptions managed? What analytics and reporting is done? How is this information used? And what would enhance supply chain performance? So we may live as a logistics provider in the deliver phase, but we need to understand what's going on upstream and where you're incurring, where those pockets of risks and excessive costs are, to help better manage performance on your behalf. And that may be done directly or indirectly. So there are a lot of pieces that need to be put together in this. And David, if you would go on to the next, please. These are just a few of the things that we know you within the industry need, whether it's digitalization or supply chain security, regulatory and trade compliance needs to be very robust. We need data and predictive analytics to drive better decision making and planning. There's emphasis always in your industry on continuous improvement. So you're managing all these different pieces, but as a business partner to you, we need to help pull all of those pieces together. And it is really about connecting people, processes, and technology. So, we need to be looking at the cost management. We need to be looking at the risk management and the information management. I showed you before just some of the limited view, the constraints a customer can face in one part of their supply chain, that process map. I talked about the other customer that we're working through the center of gravity study and some other improvement initiatives with. It is still one part of the supply chain. And if we're not engaging with everyone that partners with you in the supply chain and understanding where we can give connectivity, whether it's through collaboration or through technology solutions, we're going to have a very limited impact on the value that we bring. One thing that really struck me in putting together the information on the clients was that I had been reading about reading the buyer group strategy, and I think they were spot on. And I think this slide reflects it. The pandemic has accelerated a number of trends, meaning that we need to execute our strategy and implement the transformation of our company at a faster pace. This is something that's been echoed by many of you. And I think that's where we're saying to you as a potential partner, along with our business partners, that we want to be able to change the way that we do business with you. Predictability, reliability, and agility in your supply chain isn't something that just gets achieved with robust data and visibility. Data can be a reflection of what has happened in the past. It can be what's currently happening. It can be what's about to happen, but it doesn't tell you why it's happening or what's driving the results. This really truly requires the intuitiveness, knowledge, and experience of the people you work with, both as colleagues and business partners. I quoted a lot of different companies, or a few different companies during this opening address, and I wanted to at least leave you with some of the slides of or some of the quotes that really did inspire us. And what is really telling here is that all of you are really in alignment with each other in terms of what you're trying to achieve and who you want to be for your constituents in the market. So with that all said, I thank you to all of your companies who have inspired us with this session. I thank you for participating, and we all, on behalf of our entire team and our business partners, we look forward to serving you. Thank you very much.
Carol, thank you. Thank you very, very much. Wow, textbook applied theory mixed with an incredible amount of applied experiences. I think whoever was in our audience studying or finishing their master's degree in supply chain logistics, you just helped them pass the magna cum laude status. So truly incredible. Thank you for challenging the status quo of resilience, adaptability, and flexibility. And you're absolutely right. And with that, now I will transition over to the panel, to our esteemed panel, very exciting. And that will be hosted by my colleague, Dina Bunn. So Dina, over to you.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everybody. As Frank said, my name is Dina Bunn. I am responsible for the customer experience of our pharma and healthcare customers here at Jazz. So I'm happy to be hosting this panel today, and I will start out by introducing the colleagues that we'll be speaking with. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Fabio Moreno. Fabio is the Senior Director, Supply Chain North America at Glenmark Pharmaceuticals. He's held numerous leading positions in operations, demand planning, and supply chain in South and North America. So he has a lot of really rich experience on the end-to-end pharmaceutical supply chain in the Americas. He makes good use of his 10 years of entrepreneurial experience in the early stages of his career to really help drive sales performance through focused supply chain management. So welcome to you, Mario. We also have Jennifer Haig joining us today. Jennifer is the head of Cargo Specialty Products for the Americas at United Airlines Cargo. She's responsible for driving sales and developing the strategy of the United Cargo Specialty Product Suite, which includes temperature control as well as all of their other special products. Prior to that, she was a strategic partner manager, globally responsible for 4 of United's top freight forwarding partners. And prior to that, she spent 15 years in the air freight security, aviation security industry. And an interesting little side note is that among her other degrees, she has a bachelor's degree in biology, which makes her especially suited to be talking about pharma and healthcare today. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Stephanie Cardos. Stephanie is the Regional Manager of Cargo Product Sales for Qatar Airways Cargo. She's originally from Pennsylvania, but she spent her career between Atlanta, Doha, Qatar, and she's currently based in Amsterdam, where she's responsible for the pharma and healthcare product at Qatar Airways Cargo for Europe. She got started in the logistics industry as a freight forwarder, and she's actually a licensed customs broker as well. So she knows lots of different sides of the business, and she is currently also studying to become a Six Sigma Green Belt. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Dina.
And then finally, we have Mario Tenebruso with us. Mario is the Vice President of Air Freight for the Americas here at Jazz. He's an Italian national who grew up in Munich, and he actually started his freight forwarding career as an ocean import clerk. He's worked in many different sales and operations management roles in Milan, in Los Angeles, in New Jersey, and he finally has landed in Atlanta, where he joined the Jazz family in 2019 to grow the air freight product in the Americas. Welcome, Mario.
Thank you, Dina.
Before we start asking questions, so two things. We have the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen for all our audience. If you have questions, we would love for you to place them there so we can talk about what you want to hear about. Today, we have some topics of our own that we'll start discussing as well, but we would really love to have the audience contributing their questions and comments. So please make use of that Q&A button. Please don't raise your hand because we won't have any speaking ability, but if you have something you'd like to share or ask, please use that Q&A button. And before we start the discussion, we have a short poll we'd like to conduct. So drawing off of some of the topics that Carol mentioned in her keynote speech there, we'd like to hear from you. Where in the supply chain does your organization have the least connection with your key logistics partners? So using the supply chain operations model that Carol showed us during the planning stage, sourcing, making, or delivering, where do you have the least connection with your key logistics partners? So please feel free to answer those questions, give us your thoughts there. Let's wait a few seconds and see what we get. A lot of planning. So this is the least connection with your key logistics partners. Interesting. Okay, excellent. So this is a lot of it in the planning stages, some in the make, some in the deliver, but you know, somehow spread throughout, but mostly in the planning stage. Okay, and then in the next question, we'd like to hear from you, where in the supply chain using that same model do you have the most connection with your logistics partners? So where do you really collaborate more? Planning, sourcing, making, or delivering? Maybe not surprisingly, a lot in the deliver, which we like to hear. But to Carol's point, it really makes a lot of sense to have that go throughout the whole thing. So it's really, again, not really surprising for us. And I'm happy to see that a lot of it is in the deliver there. And I think we can do some more work on seeing how we can spread that evenly throughout all of it, so we can really contribute and with each other make some good progress there in addressing those key areas. So thank you for that input. Here are the results shared. Did everybody see them? I don't know if you could. Excellent, good, thank you. All right, so question Q&A is open, and before we get any questions from the audience, let's have a short discussion amongst ourselves here. As we know, the theme for this webinar is how can we be better connected? So let's get right to the point. What areas do you feel we need to be better connected? I'm going to start with Fabio, please, because we're very happy to have a pharma and healthcare manufacturer here with us today. So Fabio. Thank you,
Dina. It's a pleasure to be here. It was extremely interesting, and I couldn't thank Carol more on her presentation. I absolutely agree 100% what she presented, and And for me, it's back to supply chain, back to logistics 101. When we look at, it doesn't surprise me at all that it says, where do we have the biggest focus? Delivery, right? But at the same time that I see that we have the biggest focus, during the pandemic, we saw that there's a huge gap still in the logistics, in the delivery piece. And when we look at what do I mean by the gap, is that we invested technology, we invested information, we invested having that connection in between, but then during the crisis mode, we realized, hey, I don't have the connection that I need. I don't have the information, especially in between the handovers that Carol outlined that brilliantly. On the handovers, it's a gray area, it's a gap. So when we hand over from our brokers to our freight forwarders, and then from the freight forwarders when it lands in the US, or when it reaches the port, and the handover again to our trucking companies, and then the pickup to our delivery to the warehouse, every stage when we have a handover, we have a little bit of a gray area. And that gray area goes a long way. Why? Again, she mentioned brilliantly that during the pandemic, we had a lot of disruption in supply chain. That could be API, that could be components, and it made us increase our inventory positions in many products. So our cash, you need cash to increase your inventory. So how can you reduce your cash again? How can you bring that cash down? Any day that I improve on my logistics, any half a day that I'm able to bring my product sooner to my warehouse, I can again bring down my inventory position. So if I have visibility on that handover when it reaches the US, and I can pick my product sooner from the airline, from the airport, a day sooner than I used to pick up in the past, that's a day sooner in my inventory safety stock that I can gain again. It's millions of dollars that you save by bringing a day sooner. So that connection, that handover connection for me is a huge topic. I just thought Carol outlined that brilliantly there.
Absolutely agree. And it's not only that your goods are tied up in inventory, you're not able to sell them, right? We had one provider tell us once that, not provider, one of our customers tell us once that every single day their product was in transit, cost them $4 million. So that's a perspective that we don't often think of on the freight forwarding side of things. We're just, moving your goods. So,
well, and that's where the theme is fantastic. David couldn't have a better theme. And we look at, if you ask me, what's my passion, what's my focus, it's how do we as a supply chain specialist have product available? How do we help sales? What can we do to make sure we don't have disruption in the supply chain? So our job is actually secondary. Number one is sales. Without product being there for sales, our job doesn't need to be there at all, right? So,
right.
So
yeah.
it's all about making sure product is available. So it's very relevant.
Excellent. Thank you. Jen, I'm going to ask you to go next. How do you think, what areas do you think we could be better connected?
I'm actually going to paraphrase what Carol said during her presentation. She said, if we are not engaging all parts, we'll have limited ability on what we can bring. And I think we've had a very traditional freight forwarder to the airline. And as we've moved into COVID, we've really seen the importance of the airline talking to Fabio, understanding what their needs are, making sure we have the right cooler space, making sure our setup is what they need. But I think on the other side, also working for an airline and making sure the internal discussions between the cargo and the passenger teams are really working to build what we need as an airline in total. So definitely shipper to freight forward to airline, but also internally within our own organization, we definitely saw a need for connection there so we can better ourselves.
Absolutely. Stephanie?
Yeah, from my point of view as an airline, it's really, we need to be better connected everywhere. There really is, we see such a small piece of the pie, right? And there's so much that we're lacking in visibility. Majority of the time, what we see is what the freight forwarder provides to us, right? And whether that be the full information, whether that be part of it, there's really lacking that connection and what goes on in the forefront with the shippers, and we do see freight forwarders and shippers being more open to what we call tripartite meetings. But why don't we involve the ground handlers more, right? Why don't we involve other parties? Why don't we involve trucking companies? Why don't we, it's really, I think we need to bring all players to the game to really have that connection and understand the entire story. Because without it, again, we're just kind of stuck in the day-to-day, okay, this is what you need, here you go. and whether that's really what the requirement is. You know, are there alternate solutions that we can offer, or is this really what's 100% required, or can we offer plan B or plan C? So for me, it's really about visibility on all spectrums.
I love it. You're really bringing that full perspective in there from the freight forwarder side of things, but you're also really addressing what Fabio mentioned. He called it gray area, but I call it a black hole. So maybe a little more dramatic, but you know, it's really a blind spot for our customers. Mario, we were recently in a meeting with some of our carrier partners, and they actually brought up that question about tripartite meetings. So tell me, what do you think are the areas where we should be better connected?
Yeah, no, you know, it's actually interesting, you know, because I always compare it a little bit to the job that my wife is doing. She's an architect, right? And she's obviously very much in the planning phase, in the design phase, right? And then trying, how is she then trying to put all the other parties together? And I see us as a freight forwarder, as a service provider, right, specifically for the pharma and healthcare industry, very much as an architect, someone that needs to design, obviously, the plan, needs to translate, you know, what is the vision of our customer, to actually then translate this into the plan, and then to translate this into you know, all the partners that we are engaging with, right? So I mean, with an architect, you have, you know, obviously the carpenter, you have the structural engineer, you have, you know, many other parties that are involved, right? The contractor, and there's so many parties, right? And you want to obviously don't leave anything for surprises, right? You know, not to have in this gray area. And here we also have then to translate and get actually our vendors on the same plan and actually engage them in the plan, right? Because they have so many great ideas, right? And sometimes we can actually also in the design phase miss something where the airline can help us with, where, you know, like Stephanie said, you know, why not also then engaging with the ground handler? Because also the ground handlers have good ideas, right? And sometimes a plan can also change based on the input that we're getting from our vendors. And I think that's really essential in the planning phase to get all these parties engaged already, right? And listen to them, understand what are their requirements, what they are looking for, how can we make it better, more efficient, you know, because at the end of the day, and that comes back to this pandemic, right? What did the pandemic show us? I think everyone is now understanding how important it is, you know, to bring these, you know, medicines, these vaccines, you know, to the patient, you know, in the safest and most efficient way. And that, I think that's very important to get everyone engaged in the planning phase and design actually the plan together.
Yeah, absolutely. Just thinking that, you know, I've been doing this for a long time, specifically in the temperature controlled pharma logistics, and nobody has ever really understood what I do for a living. And now, like Frank and Carol both said, I don't really need to explain it anymore. I can just say, you know, the vaccines, and they get it. So Fabio, I think you mentioned visibility a little bit. And of course, everything we're talking about has a lot to do with visibility. So we'll get into that in a little bit. One of the ways that we have always approached this, you know, the handovers and the aspect of dealing with many subcontractors is through our quality management system. We manage our vendors, our customers manage us as a vendor, we manage our vendors and make sure they manage their vendors, because it all is kind of a layered approach. I have a question here from the audience that has to do somewhat with that. So collaboration, this is a question. Collaboration and connection is key, but what do you feel is needed to build trust and reliability between supplier, airline, and forwarder? And that goes kind of to that supplier management question, because we're trusting and auditing, but making sure that our suppliers are doing and their suppliers are doing the right way. So I'm going to go back to you, Fabio, with that one. What specifically do you feel is needed to build trust and reliability between supplier, airline, and forwarder?
I think it's a fantastic question. And that is, I want to say that I spent most of my time on lately on trying to have that trust, trying to build that bond. And it's absolutely what Stephanie just mentioned. How can you do that without having those meetings with multiple stakeholders at the same time? In the past, we had the connection between the freight forward. Maybe that was enough. We had connectivity. We were fine. But during the pandemic, we came to, that's why I mentioned supply chain 101, because we go back to communication. We just need to communicate and having those meetings and align expectations, because my expectation may be different than the other customer you might have. My expectation is that I want to pick up faster. Maybe someone else's expectation is they need more security than I need, maybe, or that they need multiple options of pickups and multiple times of the day. You have to align expectations with your customers. You need to align expectations throughout all the stakeholders involved and make sure everyone has that understanding. And the moment you have the same goal, the trust is going to be there, because you have the same goal, you have the same alignment, and you deliver to that expectation, the trust naturally gets there. So I absolutely agree with Stephanie that right now it's just communication. It's just that put everyone on the same table, have it on the same meeting. I love the idea of having the ground handlers also in the same meeting, because it's one of the issues I had recently in a quarter end, that I needed a product and it would just held back with the ground handlers, that I couldn't pick up faster. So absolutely, I just think that putting everyone together, align expectations, it just builds the trust.
For sure. I'm going to add another aspect just to your thoughts. I'm not the one who's supposed to be talking, but just to put the thought in your head of even the packaging suppliers. I mean, that's more in sort of the planning and design phase, but there are aspects of it within freight forwarding that we need to understand, and we need to make sure our customers understand how easy it is it to handle these kinds of packages, and not only load them, but moving them along, and what kind of storage do they need to be put in. And so we can also collaborate in that area as well.
A fantastic point. Fantastic. Because during the pandemic, we adjusted in order, Carol mentioned, costs went through the roof. We try to see as an organization, what could we do to minimize costs in freight? So we had to relook at our packaging. We had to relook at our pallet dimensions. We had to relook at how we ship things. And we had to align with our freight forwarders, our partners. Can you guys handle this new dimension? What can we do better? So absolutely, the packaging is also a very important component. Absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking about trust and reliability, I'm going to jump to Mario. I want to hear what you think about that. What do you think we can do in the freight forwarding seat, kind of in between the airline and the customer, our customer, the shipper, freight, pharma and healthcare manufacturers? What can we do to help increase trust and reliability?
Yeah, I think it already started, with some of the documentation and quality agreements that we, before we actually engage in some traffic, right, or before we lay out a plan for a certain lane, that we talk about quality agreements, right? And I think over the past few years, there has been done a lot, at least from the vendor perspective, right? If we engage with vendors these days, they all know about quality agreements, at least most of them, especially Jennifer and Stephanie know about them. So I think that makes it already very, very easy. And that's also building up the trust already. And that holds us also a little bit accountable on both sides, right? I mean, everyone is specifically outlining what they are capable of doing, right? How they would like to engage in such shipments. And if there are certain parts that they are not able to do, I think they're more open to talk about it, right? And there's maybe also some solutions that we find together, right? I think it's all about risk mitigation, right? And like also Fabio mentioned, the ground handlers taking a very important piece of that as well. And we want to understand, what are the capabilities of the ground handlers, right? Every airport is different, right? They have different infrastructure. They have different people. In this pandemic, obviously a big thing is workforce, right? At these airports, right? And I mean, depending which airport you're looking at, but if we receive open feedback, from the ground handler, from the warehouse operator, what their capabilities are, or where they see actually difficulties, then we can put this into the plan, or work, find some other solutions or alternatives for that matter, right? And I think that's building up the trust, right? If we talk openly about it, if we're honest about it, if we don't hide things, right? If we get all parties involved, that's I think where we have to do our part and building up the trust more between all the parties.
Absolutely. I'm not going to say one of the things that I'm thinking about now has to do with, how open are we with each other? How much are we willing to share with each other? There's always somehow the fear of being labeled as being at fault and having some sort of liability in there. So that's always a tricky aspect to it. But I think at the end of the day, we all need to realize we're talking with the same goal. Like Fabio said, we need to get these much needed medicines to the end patient, and we need to make sure that they get there in the right condition. So Jen, what is your thought on this?
Mario, you kind of hit the nail on the head when you were saying it's when something goes wrong, how do we communicate that? And I think you're only as good as your last shipment, right? So if you have an issue, you need to let someone know, you need to come to them with a solution of, this is what happened, this is how we fix it, and this is how we move forward. That, in my opinion, is how you're going to grow the trust, because that's how you're going to let them know that you are on their side and got their back. But I think on the other side of it, we're kind of focused also on the operational piece. But I know in a traditional freight forwarder airline shipper relationship, there's that fear that, well, what's the airline going to say to the shipper? And I think also setting some guidelines as those discussions are happening. From Jazz's point, Jazz, this is United, this is what we want you talking to Glenmark about. Can you help us understand your facilities, what your setup is, that sort of thing. And really, as you're starting to build that trust, build that relationship, having those guidelines so you can continue to build upon those and really get that, as Stephanie said, that tripartite sort of discussion going forward.
Yep, for sure. Stephanie, do you have any additional thoughts?
I'm going to put maybe a bit of a strange twist on it, but to me, it's everything we're talking about is similar to to me, it's human 101. How are you going to build trust or loyalty or reliability in a person, right? To me, it should more or less be treated the same with pharmaceutical or any shipments, in the freight forwarding industry. So how are you going to build that loyalty, your understanding? It starts with conversation. So maybe a friend of a friend being, maybe your friend is the freight forwarder and the friend of a friend is the airline. They say, yeah, this person's great, you can really trust them, you can rely on them. So to a certain degree, you trust your friend, so you're going to trust the third party. But really, how can you build that trust or build that relationship without a conversation, without the communication, without transparency? If a friend messes up in your friendship or relationship, the only way to resolve that is to be clear and honest and, say how you're going to fix it moving forward, right? I think it's the same thing with shipments. So, a little bit of what everybody just said, but also relating it, I guess, to the human experience in a way.
For sure. That's a good point. Also, a little bit beyond the human relationship aspect, though, I think we need to have evidence within this world of, if something does go wrong, what are we doing to fix it? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? What's the evidence that we put the right measures in place? In general, I mean, when we talk about visibility or digitalization, I think there's a whole different, and we did have actually in the previous webinar, we talked a bit about digitalization, so don't want to kind of go there again, but I do have some other questions. Again, I want to remind the audience that please ask us your questions, give us your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about from our prepared questions that we thought about in advance was kind of a controversial one. So in the experience of the last 18 going on 2 years now, months, what was kind of the best kind of partner that you worked with? Not individual who was that partner, but what kind of partner was it, or what were the aspects of it that were really great, and what was the most difficult? And I'm going to go back to Fabio for that one. So what was the best kind of partner and what was the worst?
You know what? I give a lot of thought to this, and obviously no names here, but it has absolutely everything to do with what we were discussing. So if I go back to last 18 months, and I go back to beginning of the crisis, beginning of COVID, what did we do differently when we had to do things differently? For example, we are at the East Coast in the US. We're based out of New Jersey. 100% of our shipments used to come to New York, JFK, Newark Airport, or JFK, or Newark or New York ports. During peak of the pandemic, I was sending things to Chicago, Atlanta, Washington, and trucking it over here, or sending to different ports in Virginia, bringing it over here. We had to find different routes. The partners that were hand to hand with us were the ones that were communicating with us, were the ones that were helping us find different solutions, were the ones that were communicating with us saying, hey, all right, this is the situation right now, being transparent. It's happening. I can't find you an availability, but I have this one, I have that one. The partner that were just saying, oh, you know, it's part of the crisis, nothing we can do, we're just increasing prices, taking the opportunity of the wave, you know what, they're not our partners anymore, and we had to maybe deal with them for a month or two. And the real partners that we found out that were hand to hand with us, absolutely what, again, Stephanie and Jennifer were also mentioning regarding transparency, having that communication, having that openliness between both of us. This is what's going on. I have two great partners that they have really messed up some of our shipments, but being honest, being transparent what's going on, and helping us find a solution to all that goes a long way. So I would put it absolutely this way. The great partners are the ones that understood my needs, were hand to hand with me on communication, were openness throughout this whole COVID, and are helping us find the best solutions. I can give some examples of solutions that costs went through the roof. So we're saying, what can we do differently? Find multimodal. So we were flying it from India to Europe somewhere, and then bringing it on sea over here, or the opposite, sailing on sea from somewhere in India to some port, and then flying it to the US, trying to minimize costs, trying to find alternatives. Those are the partners that goes a long way. The ones that just put their hands up saying, oh, you know what, it's the price, that is what it is, take it or leave it. Those are absolutely the worst partners, no doubt.
Thank you. Good to know. I'm going to go to, who do I want to hear from next? Stephanie, I would like to hear your thoughts. Who are the best? What kind of partners were the best from the other side of the coin, if you will, in this in these last few months? And what were the most challenging?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Fabio said, definitely the ones that worked with us, the ones that communicated. Also, I think important was loyalty. And as well, the ones that have continued to invest with us and invest also within their own company for specifically for the pharma product. Because of course we know money was tight all around, but we saw several freight forwarders, ground handlers, several companies all along the lines that continued to invest, because it really showed, I think that one of the good things with the pandemic is it really showed the importance of the pharmaceutical and healthcare product, and how important it really is to the world. In terms of worst, I mean, I hate to use that word, but I agree with Fabio, you know, opportunistic, of course. But in addition, I think we did see some that kind of had impossible expectations, whether it be around RFQs, whether it be around communication, whether it be, you know, several different factors. There were just impossible expectations. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic as an airline. I mean, literally things shut down overnight, you know, so there needed to be that understanding, and again, working with us to say, hey, okay, here's priority one, you know, maybe this deadline can be extended, or let's, you know, have a better understanding. So that's what I guess I would classify as under the worst category.
So similar, who was more open to working together, really putting your heads together. Jen, what about from your side?
I think Fabio and Stephanie hit on it, but I think some of the other relationships or partners that we saw throughout the pandemic are the regulators, building the relationship internally within the airline. We're so used to just flying freight here to there, but we knew that as COVID hit, as vaccines needed to start moving, there were needs to start moving these vaccines around the world. So I just speak on behalf of United, we looked at the ability to increase dry ice limits on aircraft so we could move, working with the regulators, working internally, working with our freight forwarding partners, and working with the shipping companies to make sure that we could get these vaccines over to different locations in the US and around the world. So I think that was pretty key in showing where that true partnership was. And then also, like you guys said, the people who said, okay, we understand you have 5 flights as of this date. What can we do? How can we help you, support you? And how can we get these, how can we continue to keep flying these airplanes? On the worst side, again, like Stephanie said, I hate using that word, but it was really those people that said, oh, well, you know what? Airline A, B, and C can do it for a lesser rate. We're going to move over to them. So we work to build these relationships within industry, within Jazz. You guys are fantastic throughout the pandemic, and really be able to move on. And as we move out of the pandemic, continue to see that relationship grow.
Yeah, for sure. And so that's an excellent segue to go to Mario, because I know he was, and so I also wanted to just mention or add on to what you said, Jen, the whole Praetor thing, the using passenger aircraft as a cargo aircraft was a whole thing in and of itself as well with the regulators. But Mario, I know that you guys have been working very tirelessly to provide solutions for our customers during this time. So tell me what you think. What was the best partner to work with, and what was the most difficult?
Exactly. I still remember, you know, it was like yesterday. I mean, end of March, right? Beginning of April, when it was actually pronounced a pandemic, right? And then specifically here in the Americas or in the US, where I'm located, you know, there was probably 1 week where, you know, it was rather quiet. You know, I think everyone had to take a step back and thinking about, okay, how do we navigate through this, you know, and putting all the ideas together. But then, you know, after that, I think the really good partners like Fabio mentioned, you know, they came forward, you know, and shared their ideas, you know, so really it was the communication, you know, and I think we never had so many you know, discussions on a regular basis, almost daily, right? Because things changed basically by the day, by the minute sometimes, right? And you know, we had then, oh, okay, we do this, and then oh, but you know, tomorrow we were then you know, stuck with something else, so we had then to change the plan again. So there was really a lot of collaboration, specifically with our airline partners, right? And like Jennifer and also Stephanie said, right? I mean, how they're impacted, you know, how can they help and keep goods moving? And how could we then also contribute together, you know, for our customers to keep the planes in the air and keep cargo moving? So, I mean, since the pandemic, you know, we moved over 300 charter flights, you know, for here in the Americas. You know, so that by itself already requires a lot of communication and, you know, strategies, right? So it's really changed by the day, like I said, by the minute. And you know, I give kudos really to our core carrier partners, you know, to United, Qatar, you know, that we work with pretty closely. And find solutions to keep the goods moving in the best efficient way for our customers, right? And really then, okay, who are the worst to work with? I think you cannot really pinpoint to one specific partner, but you know, of course, you have many partners in a certain segment, right? Whether it's an airline, whether it's truckers, you know, whether it's warehouse operators, you know, etc. But really those that communicated on a frequent basis with us, you know, they shared, you know, how things are changing and how they're, you know, evolving out of this pandemic, if you so will. These were the best to work with. And that's where we also concentrated our focus on in order to help our customers.
So conversely, then the worst were those who weren't so communicative, I guess.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, we only have about 10 more minutes of time. So again, I want to remind the audience to ask us your questions if you have any. But I want to start also giving you guys the chance to give your final thoughts a little bit about what kind of advice would you give to I would like for each of you to give advice to the other. So Mario, I would like for you to give advice to an airline, not specifically United or Qatar, but any carrier. And then what advice would you give to a pharma and healthcare manufacturing company about how we can collaborate more? And then each of you also have the chance as we go around the table to give your 2 pieces of advice to the other parties present on the call.
Yeah.
So starting with you, Mario.
No, thanks, Dina. And I'm starting maybe then to Fabio, right, as an advice. I mean, obviously, under the current circumstances, you know, what everyone is always looking at is predictability, right? And predictability starts a little bit with forecasting, right? Okay, what's coming tomorrow? What's coming next week, right? How can we put this into the plan, right? Because we like to then, once we have the plan, to stick to the plan, but you know, of course, we need to keep also a little bit flexible. So for you know, a pharma and healthcare manufacturer and our customer, we always, you know, tell them, you know, under market conditions that we have today, forecasting is key. So the better information you can give us, right, the better we can work with, right, and design the plan, and then obviously discuss it together with our airline partners, right, and core carriers. And then the advice maybe for the airline is obviously, I think, keep communicating, you know, as you have been communicating throughout this pandemic. You know, it's really fantastic. Don't let it slip, right? This is really key. And I know we have regular communications. By now, it's really on a weekly basis. You know, we have it scheduled actually in the calendar. You know, so keep it up that way. That's really the advice I can give.
Great, thank you. Jen, what about from your side? Advice to a freight forwarder and to a pharma and healthcare manufacturer?
Well, I think Mario hit it on the head with the forecast, with speaking with a lot of the shippers, understanding what's coming, so we can make sure we have the flights, the solutions in place, whether it's you need a 2 to 8 cooler or a -20 storage facility, and just understanding that. With that said, I also understand that things change and they change like that. So I think the education to the airline, we know our pharma, we know how it moves, but understanding your specific needs, which then in turn allows all of us to be talking together and having that discussion. I think from a freight forwarder side, continue the collaboration, continue the discussion, and allow us to speak with the shipper, because it's only going to help your product be better, and it's going to help the whole solution be better in the long run. I think that's going to be the big piece. And again, I think this is a great start for it and getting that collaboration discussion going. So thank you to Dina and David for getting this set up.
Thank you, Jen. Stephanie, from your side.
Yeah, so in terms of freight forwarder, I mean, again, I'll go back to what I said in the beginning and what Jennifer just said as well. The facilitation, I guess you could say, of the tripartite meetings and of that communication, I think it's really key. And we've seen some great success stories come out in the times that has been possible and when there is that open communication. So I think, you know, definitely help to facilitate those. Again, the be transparent in sharing customer requirements or shipper requirements, sorry, for capabilities and handling. When issues do come up, you know, let's involve everybody. I think we see, again, it's a small piece of the pie. When there are temperature excursions, you know, a CAPA report, of course, an investigation is done. But then what happens with that? What is actually shared with the shipper? What questions does the shipper have? Can we, you know, sit, you know, virtually around a table or around a table in real life? I don't know, to decide how we improve and how we make things better for the future. I think in terms of, the pharma and healthcare manufacturer or shipper, again, forecasting. I mean, I've been involved in the pharma aviation sector for 5 years, I'd say, in total. It always blows my mind a little bit that the response is always, well, you know, you know how it is with the pharma shippers. There's no forecast, things change. So I think if we're able to somehow improve that together. That can definitely facilitate a lot of improvements with transportation. I think as well, yeah, I mean, just being able to identify the risks and vulnerabilities and sharing that with the freight forwarder and with the airline as well. I had an instance a couple weeks back where I was actually speaking with the shipper and a discussion on a certain destination came up where there are limited capabilities at the ground handler. So they said, oh, you haven't seen our risk analysis? We've already incorporated that. And I said, I've never once seen a risk analysis from a shipper in all the years that I've been doing this, right? So I think, yeah, again, it comes down to communication and discussion. That's the key word. So.
And openness, right? Being open
Exactly.
to have that. Yep, for
And
sure.
always, exactly.
Thank you. Fabio, advice for freight forwarder and airline.
All right, I think we discussed a lot here. If I could summarize for the freight forwarder is, it's just really understanding your customer's goal, your customer's need. It's not anymore one solution fits all. I know it hasn't been, but now more than ever, you need to really understand your customer's need. Just because I'm sure you guys can easily adapt, adjust, and service will be absolutely different if you can do just that minor change in between one customer to the other, and that goes a long way. That's absolutely, I think, understanding your customer's need for sure. In terms of airline, I think one very important topic, Stephanie's, I think, mentioned twice here already. It's something that we've seen is very important. We had fantastic service with airlines, but then as soon as it touches the ground in the US, when it goes to the handling team or the warehouse team, which we know it's sometimes at the third-party team handling this, that whole service goes for a toss because the cargo stay there for 2-3 days without actually being able to be broken down or passed and giving it to us, where we had other airlines giving it to us in 2-3 hours. So if there's a way to really focus and have that risk analysis, very good, very interesting point, Stephanie just mentioned, understand the risk analysis that maybe the shipper or the client has done, knowing that that airport, that location has more of a risk than other location, understanding and communicating with that ground handling team a little bit more. So having that last mile communication with the ground handling and the warehouse team, I think would be very important.
Excellent. Awesome. My mind is racing. So many thoughts. I would like to, if you guys don't mind, share from my perspective, my advice that I would give. So first of all, to the carrier, I would ask that we are open with our mistakes. So we mentioned it before, but we work with some carrier partners where when it comes to a CAPA, it takes a long time, or they're not very thorough in the root cause analysis, or not forthcoming with what really happened, kind of a thing. So that transparency, I think, is so important for us to all learn the lessons and make sure we put measures in place so it doesn't happen again, that continuous improvement that Carol mentioned way back at the beginning. So that's my big one there. And I think Stephanie, you mentioned it about having that openness between the subcontractors as well. So really, we would never approach one of your ground handlers directly. We need to know from you. It's also tripartite kind of on that side of things. So that I think would be great. And then for our pharma and healthcare manufacturing customers, for me, what I really wish there was more of was information about the product. We are so keen to know stability data, like if it does have an excursion, how long can it be out of the temperature range, so that we make sure we're doing everything we can to minimize the effects of it. So things like that, the kind of packaging that you use. We have so many of our customers who say, why do you need that kind of information? Why do you need that kind of detail? We really want to be able to do a proper risk analysis, that level of detail, to put this information into the risk analysis, so that we're really making sure we're doing everything we can with our partners to mitigate the risks in sending the cargo. So before we end it, I would like to give you guys the opportunity to say one more thing if you so would like. If not, I would like to thank you all very much. Anybody want to make one more comment, or are we good? I think it's been a great discussion. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you to the audience for your input, and yeah, thank you to Carol and Frank, and see you next time. I'm going to go back to Frank for him to send us out.
Thank you. Thank you, Dina, and thank you to everyone that participated. Carol, you touched a nerve. You absolutely touched a nerve there on how to challenge ourselves and the way we do business. So thank you for that. Stephanie, thank you for bringing in the concept of the ground handlers coming to the table to build the supply chain logistics models that we need to mitigate risks. We don't see enough of them. And today there are so many digital tools: traceability, visibility, lane risk assessments, geo positioning, real-time tracking. The cost of all that has significantly gone down over the last 10 to 15 years. It shouldn't be an option. It should be a required way of doing business, because only then can you really understand the risk, build the right, not overbuild, build the right temperature control solution that creates efficiencies. You have data, you have forecasting, you have visibility, and from there comes a number of efficiencies that we've talked about here during this last hour and a half. It truly has been an honor. Thank you all for participating, for taking your time. The COVID world for us, if I can summarize a lot of what we've discussed in terms of tenets of best practices for our industry, there are parts of it that I think the new normal, right? There are parts of the previous COVID-19 world that are not going to be present in the way that we saw. The new normal has taught us all, whether personal or professional, there's certain choices, there's certain tolerances, there's certain ways that we have to live differently. The same has to happen for our industry, right? We must challenge. And I'd like to go back to the quote earlier that Carol had placed of Mr. Glenn Saldana of Glenmark, right? The tenets of doing business in the post-COVID world are resilience, adaptability, and flexibility. Let's challenge that. Let's challenge that status quo. And I will close by Mr. Jeff Simmons. Elanco is what we do has never been more relevant. What relevance with relevance comes great responsibility to bring innovation and to lead with a new level of urgency. And in particular, responsibility to make a difference, not just to survive this period of uncertainty, but to separate ourselves and find ways to help society. And that's important, because whatever we do, it always has to be about patient health within the scope of pharma and healthcare. And with that, I thank you all for spending the last hour and a half with us. We hope you have been able to take significant takeaways, methodologies, process improvements, concepts to be able to build better supply chains or better business within your organization. And we will see you at the next webinar, probably early next year. So thank you very much on behalf of JAS. Thanks.